Good morning. So again, I'm Pastor Dale Brown, for those of you on Zoom, and welcome. A couple of weeks ago, I got a phone call from my brother-in-law. Said, Dale, can you come over to the neighbor's house? There's a cow calving and there's a head back and I can't get it out. And I told him, this is why I don't have cow friends. He says, well, are you coming or not? I says, John, this is your friend. It's not mine. So anyway, when I wore the humor out over the phone, I decided I'd go give him my humor in person. And I drove over to be neighborly. And calvings are something we deal with 4 times a day on average at our farm. And we've got people trained for it and stuff. But usually when they're bad, right, I'm one of the last people that get called before we call the vet. Okay. And when you get called for a calving, right, the cow is usually down and there's some complication. And to diagnose the problem, I usually have a pocket full of these. I don't usually bring them to church. But this helps me figure out the presentation of the calf, right? Do I have 2 feet in the head? That's what I want, right side up. Or do I have 1 foot, 2 feet no head, the tail? Is her uterus twisted? I mean, is she not even dilated, right? So then, once we figure out what the problem is, it's time to solve it, okay? And in my experience, when you have a really bad calving, you can't wear these, okay? These are nice to diagnose and nice for minor stuff, but when you really have to get to work, you've got to take off the sleeves. And the reason why is usually inside the cow, it is so far in that you're in all the way up to here. And if you're worried about staying clean, keeping your sleeve on, you're not going to be focusing on what you want to do. Okay. And the other problem is with this particular cow and with many of them, they might be laying in a nice dry area, but behind them, it's usually not. And, you drop to your knees in the mud, you lay on your side, and you're a mess when you're done. And after this happens, you usually have to start your whole day over again, right? It doesn't matter if you got a shower, had clean clothes on in the morning, you're going back home, half dressed, with your clothes in the back of the pickup truck to get a shower. I usually get changed out on the back porch. You probably all have other situations like this, right? I was going to split firewood the other week, and I drove my tractor out the lane, and Steve, my neighbor, was home. And I hadn't seen him for a long time, so I drove over in his driveway and I sat there and we're talking about his wife and what's going on at the farm. And I mentioned that I thought the PTO clutch was slipping in my tractor. So without even breaking conversation, he pulled out an adjustable wrench, was on his back underneath the tractor, and he had it adjusted, right? It's like, wow, I would have been on YouTube and studying this for hours before I attempted to figure out what I was doing. And I feel sorry for Jeff and all his house repair people, right? All his house construction people. He's probably always getting bugged about how to do this. I know I bug him a lot about how to insulate my shop and hang aluminum and all that kind of stuff. So today we're in the book of Mark, okay? And the book of Mark is thought to be wrote by Mark. That was the deduction, at least at 100 AD. And Mark was friends with Paul and Barnabas, okay? Mark was also a co-worker with Peter. Mark, the Gospel of Mark is actually Mark recanting a lot of Peter's sermons and Peter's description of Christ's life. Mark, or John Mark as he's also known, can be found throughout the Bible in Acts 12 through 15, Colossians 4, 2 Timothy 4, and Philemon. So the gospel, according to Mark, starts with Jesus' baptism, okay? And then it moves through him calling his disciples. It moves through a bunch of parables, other teachings, discussions with the Pharisees. There are healings, feeding the 5,000, and a bunch of things. And right prior to our text today, which is Mark 8, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you think I am?" Well, the answer was John the Baptist. Another said Elijah. But Peter said, "The Christ." Now, Peter's idea of the Christ may not have been quite right yet, right? They were expecting a messianic king that would save them from the oppression of the Roman Empire, to make things right. So Jesus responds in verse 31. And so it's that's Mark 8:31. It's on page 714 in your Bible there at the pews, or it's on the back of your bulletin. Verse 31, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. So this is like a turning point, this whole attitude of what God's kingdom might be. A messianic king had been foretold, and Jesus was obviously divinely sent. But is he going to die? Is this corrupt, perverted Roman Jewish governance going to prevail in conflict with Jesus? Was the king not going to restore the promised land and release them from the oppression of Rome? Verse 32, Jesus spoke plainly about this, and Jesus spoke plainly about this, and Peter, this is not wrote right in here, but anyway, let me find it in the Bible here. This will be a different version. And he spoke his word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." So Peter, based on his oppression and his limited understanding, envisions what he thinks the messianic kingdom will look like. And don't you and I do the same thing? Thinking about what we like and what we don't like, what we think is right and wrong, thinking about our security. Do we try to fit God in all those desires? Jesus in this verse is telling us, I'm not trying to fit into your world. I'm inviting you to participate with me in God's kingdom. Verse 34, then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it." So Jesus has spent time, probably a year and a half with the disciples. He spent his life describing and calling people to participate in the kingdom of God. He's been affirming correct teaching and debating corrupt teaching outside the church, inside the church. He's been performing miracles and healing. Now Jesus is telling them, admiring my power isn't enough. You need to engage with me and be my peer. You watching me squash the evil and calling it out in this world for you on your terms is not how this is going to be. You see, Jesus is building an army. He's building a community of faith. The community will be with Jesus because they share his passion. They will serve and they will suffer. So yesterday I drove out the road, one of the roads on the way to my house, and I often pull out in front of people because there's nobody on the roads between me and my house except for when I don't look. And it was the neighbor that had the calving. And he lifted up his hand and waved to me. I don't know if I've ever, I maybe talked to him once before the calving, and I haven't talked to him since. But we have a connection, right? We were rolling around in the mud together. Don't know this guy. And I learned a lot about his life and his challenges and what's going on. And I waved back, it's an interesting connection we have. As I thought about that, I actually thought about another calving, right? About, I don't know, 25 or 30 years ago, I think it was a calving, I can't remember, but it was a cow out in the pasture. And I couldn't remedy the situation, whatever it was. And the vet finally showed up. He was late and it was dark and it was raining. And we got all set up out in the pasture. It wasn't muddy. I think we were on grass, soaking wet, trying to keep a sterile area or whatever you do. And we had a John Deere Gator sitting there with the lights on for light. And as we were working, the rest of the cows come up and milled around us and shut the lights off on the Gator. And we laughed and we laughed. And I don't even know how that story ended up, but I just remember that camaraderie, the suffering, the hardship. So, are you trying to fit Jesus in your world? Are you trying to fit God only in your expectations? Do you think God is bolstering your kingdom here on this earth? Or are you laying your kingdom aside to participate with the suffering servant, Jesus, in his Father's kingdom? Thinking about this Mark 8 turning point, this transition, it is this conflict that we conquer when we are first saved, right? When we first ask Christ into our heart, we have laid down our kingdom. But I suggest that every hour after that, we need to do it again to submit to his guidance because we keep wanting to take it back. And we're not alone in this either. Peter, of course, in this exchange, not only messed up, but later on he denied Christ 3 times, right? That God's right there. Keep working with us, keep drawing us back. Matthew 16:18, Jesus says, Peter, different version of the same event. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Mark, the author of our book today, he was in conflict with Paul and Barnabas on one of their journeys. He deserted them. Paul was deeply upset. It took a long time for that relationship to heal, and Mark became one of Paul's closest friends. And I don't know what that conflict was about, but it was some kind of internal struggle. And he was doing some soul searching, right? And during this time is when he wrote this gospel. Jesus is another example, although I don't feel qualified to say much about him, but God talked to him, and Jesus had to take a lot of time in solitude and prayer. And although he doesn't seem to fall down, right? Talking about him from the human side, it takes a lot of deliberate focus and energy and submission to do as his Father wants. Jesus, thinking about this, is like the son of a successful rich businessman who does not feel entitled, right? So how about us today? We're in mission, working together, right? We've gone through struggles. We've gone through rifts in the church doing God's work. I mean, even though many of us aren't here that were here 5-10 years ago, we still have that connection. So I have a few other related scriptures. Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to the dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. You see, this Mark 8 conflict, the conflict of the messianic king that's going to come and rule, and the suffering servant king, that conflict, that submission that we have to do is healthy. That's what makes our faith alive. That's what makes the word alive. And if you're not feeling that, I have a suggestion here later. Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Revelations 3:15 and 16. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. So, you can't sit there with a sleeve in your pocket, right? This barrier to protect your comfort and your life and commit to being a follower of Jesus Christ. Sometimes you're called to get dirty and messy. So as a church, we're challenging you to do the missional experiment, the missional work, the options that we have for you. One is the CARES, which program, which Jen will talk about later. She participated in last night. Another thing that we're doing is we're doing more work with benevolence or with helping people than we used to do. But we'll keep coming up with new ideas, and maybe you guys have some ideas. But these missional things that we do, whether through the church or individually, these are all opportunities to break down our walls, right? To break us out of our kingdom and help us step into God's. They are opportunities for us to walk with our suffering servant king. So I'd like to close with a reading out of my favorite little prayer book. It's part essay, it's part of prayer, and I actually amended it to make it more Anabaptist friendly. But I think it really says what I'm talking about. My prayer is not the whimpering of a beggar, nor a confession of love, nor is the trivial reckoning of a small tradesman. Give me, and I shall give you. My prayer is the report of a soldier to his general. This is what I did today. This is how I fought to save the entire battle in my own sector. These are the obstacles that I found. Guide me in a strategy. Tomorrow, I plan to be here, awaiting instructions. My God and I are horsemen galloping in the burning sun. We're under drizzling rain. Pale, starving, unsubdued, we ride and we converse. Leader, I cry. He turns his face towards me, and I shudder to confront his anguish, his passion for the people around us. Our love for each other is rough and ready. We sit at the same table. We drink the same wine in the slow tavern of life.